So for the first question, I want to ask you a little bit about your childhood. And so can you share how your childhood experiences and environment influence your decision to work in healthcare and more specifically into the pharmaceutical industry?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Kenya, in a small village called Loitoktok. And that had an influence in me because we did not necessarily have the best access to healthcare in the part of the world where I grew up in. I probably didn't have a full appreciation of that as a kid, but as I grew up and went to school, I started understanding the disparities in healthcare between people who lived where I lived and people who lived in Nairobi and later on in the US. So that's where some of my initial interest in wanting to work in healthcare came from. I'll also say that I grew up around businesses. So my parents are not formally educated. Back then there just wasn't that much formal education access where I grew up in. So I actually grew up around businesses. My mom owned a trucking business, a wholesale business, a beer distribution business at some point. And so if you look at my career, and we'll get into that later, it's kind of this confluence of business and science. And that's where that comes from. I grew up around business, and then I went to school and I loved science. And I've always tried to find ways of meshing those two together, which is how my career has kind of evolved.
Got you. I appreciate that. And it's funny, the next question is actually kind of leading into that. If anyone knows anything about you, is that you're big on businesses, like you said, and finance. So what interests you the most about the financial side of industry? And were there any specific moments or experiences during your career that you can pinpoint that you had that helped to get you where you are today?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, the interest starts from my childhood, growing up around businesses and being fascinated by that. Going to school and loving science, but loving business equally. And then as I went into pharmacy school, especially kind of in my third year of pharmacy school, there's a class they used to have us take as TSU, they probably still do. I think it was called the pharmacoeconomics of the healthcare industry. Definitely. And I loved that class because I realized that even as a pharmacist, I might have an opportunity to have impact on a global scale, so to speak, right? As a pharmacist, you're kind of working more on a patient by patient basis. But if you work on the business side of the industry, you can actually have an impact across millions of patients, if not globally, right? Some of the therapeutics that I've been involved in developing have now been approved or are being approved around the world. So that idea and the opportunity to have impact on a global scale is kind of what drove me towards a business. And so I've tried to find ways of meshing the world of science and the world of business, and I kind of built a career around that.
Got you. So then before we even get into the next question, it's going to be about your position. But first off, congratulations on your new role on the board of directors for Zentalis. That's huge. There's many people, you're paving the way for a lot of not just students, but Black students after you. So thank you so much. Literally keep going. Everything you're doing is very inspiring. So in that same breath, what is it that a typical day, what do you do? What is it that a typical day looks like for your new role? And also, how are you able to apply your pharmacy and business skills as well as your experiences to your daily tasks?
Absolutely. So as you know, I was most recently the chief financial officer of a company called Velos Bio that we just sold. And then I am now on the boards of Zentalis, as you mentioned. I also joined the board of another biotech company called Imago, based out of the Bay Area. And I'm also on the board of an organization called Biocom, which is the California Biotech Association. And so while the board positions don't involve day-to-day work, they do involve periodic consultation with the leadership of those companies, right? So what they look for me and other board members to provide is strategic advice about key decisions that the companies are making, right? Help them think through their financing plans on a long-term basis. Help them think about their clinical strategy on a long-term basis, their pipeline strategy on a long-term basis, right? So my experience as a pharmacist, as a banker on Wall Street, as an investor, as an operator comes in handy because you can have to pull from all these experiences to be able to think through what is the right strategy for this company. What is the right clinical strategy? What is the right financing strategy for this company? But the pharmacy knowledge is extremely important because first and foremost, we are in the business of science in the pharmaceutical industry. You need to be able to understand the science to then understand the business side of it, right? And that pharmacy training provides me with that foundation understanding of science, such that if somebody talks about a mechanism of action or the ADME profile of a drug, or, the therapeutic indications they're going after, it's easy for me to pick it out just because I have that pharmacy background.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thank you for that, honestly. So then for the next question, I want to kind of go on to more back to your business side, or your focus in the business. So as we all know, the competitive nature of industry pharmacy only gets more tough as the days go on. And many people are looking for an impactful way, not just any way, but impactful ways impactful ways to make them a stronger candidate. And so they're looking towards getting a master's in business. What is your advice to PharmD candidates who are kind of contemplating and pursuing a business degree?
Absolutely. So, the first thing I'll say is that there is a place for having an MBA, but I do understand it's not for everybody. And we need an assortment of skills within the profession, right? We need the clinical pharmacist, we need the regulatory pharmacist, we need the MBA pharmacist, right? So I do operate on a small subsection of the industry, and I don't want to make it sound like everybody needs an MBA, because maybe not everybody needs an MBA, right? But if you do want to work on the business side of the industry, an MBA is extremely helpful for a number of reasons. Number one is, as a scientist, I did not get any formal business training. I wasn't trained about strategy or finance or marketing. And an MBA provides that foundational training for you to then understand the business side of things, number one, right? Number two, depending on the business school that you go to, I am a strong advocate of going into the best business school you can get into, the top 10, the top 20 business school. Partly because it gives you a certain pedigree, and that is really important in the job market. Partly because it opens up a certain network to you. And business is very much about the network that you operate in, right? So I'm a strong advocate of getting an MBA. And again, as a pharmacist operating in the business environment, with that kind of a strong brand name MBA, nobody ever questions whether I understand business, because I have an MBA from a top school, right? And so I think that is helpful in itself, away from the actual technical information that you learn in the MBA program.
Got you. So then a little earlier, you were talking about all the things that you were kind of into, and then that's tying into that. I know that you kind of have a career as a venture capitalist as well. So I kind of want to touch on that. Do you ever find it challenging or difficult to balance the demands as a venture capitalist and the expectations, as well as trying to balance that with your role as a PharmD?
No, absolutely not. Actually, I think when I worked as a full-time investor, part of the reason I think I did a good job at it is because of my PharmD training, right? Because when the companies that I invested in, or that I still invest in, are either biotech, medtech, diagnostics companies, genomics companies. And again, the core business that you're investing in is the science. And a PharmD allows you to very quickly pick up the science. You could start telling me about your company working on a whole new molecular pathway that I don't know anything about. But because of my PharmD, I'll pick it up really quickly. It's like, oh, okay, I understand cancer. Okay, you want the ADME profile. Okay, I understand what you're trying to do, right? So it was never a challenge. If anything, it was a really big advantage having that foundational science training.
Got you. So just the last little question, I always kind of like to help those, of course, viewing the videos. So it's going to be more so towards like the PharmD candidates and fellows. And my question to you is, what skills and qualities would you say are most important for PharmDs looking to advance in the industry, and as well as what action steps do you feel are important to optimize the chances of success?
Excellent. So let's start with question number one. What skills are important? First and foremost is the technical training that you learn as part of your PharmD program. I think if you have a strong foundation there, whether you go into medical affairs or regulatory strategy or marketing, whatever aspect of the pharmaceutical industry you go into, if you have a strong foundational training and understanding of the basics of pharmacology and medicinal chemistry, then I think it actually positions you really well. Now, outside of that, depending on what subsector of the pharmaceutical industry you want to go into, then you might need additional training, additional skill sets, right? So if you want to be a clinical oncology pharmacist, for example, going into a residency training and getting that clinical training might actually be very helpful. If you want to be a business person in the industry like I've been, getting an MBA and that technical training is actually really important as well. So depending on what subsector of the industry you want to go into, building on top of that foundation of pharmacy training, I think can be really helpful. Now, in terms of what experience you need, or what you can do to position yourself better, it actually kind of ties to question one, right? So if you're sitting in pharmacy school today and you're a P3 or a P4 and saying, someday I'd like to be a venture capitalist in the pharmaceutical industry, then the path that you're going to need to go on is kind of straightforward, right? Get some business training, maybe get an MBA, understand the skill set that's involved in evaluating companies and making investments into those companies. If you want to be in regulatory affairs, I'd be a strong advocate of going into one of the fellowship programs. I am a graduate of the Radcast Fellowship Program. I think it's one of the best in the country. Eli Lilly has an excellent program. So I think spending some time understanding what it is that excites you, what is it that you're passionate about, and then kind of building on top of your pharmacy's experience to allow you to pursue that is kind of how I want to build my career.
Got you. And that was actually all the questions that I had, but I did want to just do a real quick follow-up question, just because you said something about fellowships, and this is something that a lot of people talk about. What is your opinion on that? Do you think that it's necessary to get into? Obviously, it's not necessary to get into the industry, or it's not necessary to have one to get into industry. But how do you feel about it? Do you think that it's super important to have? Do you think that it sets you up better for the future? Just what is your opinion?
Absolutely. So I'll start off by telling you that I am very biased because I went to a fellowship program and it's worked out beautifully for me. So I am biased towards fellowship program.
Of course.
Outside of that, I'll tell you the rational reasons why I think it's a good idea. Number one, for me, especially in the Radcast Fellowship Program, it's a very well-structured program. You have days at the company, you have days we used to call professional development days, the PDDs, where I think it was once every 2 weeks, we'd go back to Radcast and we'd have a whole day training about managed care, about regulatory affairs, about medical affairs. And by the time I came out of my fellowship program, while my fellowship was in R&D strategy, I had a very strong foundational understanding of medical affairs and managed care and reg affairs and global marketing because I'd actually spent time learning about that. So that's number one. Number two is the network that it allows you to associate yourself with. Whether you go to the Eli Lilly program or the Radcast or whatever fellowship program you go to, these programs have been around for a while and they have people who've gone through those programs. And so being able to associate yourself with that network is important not only in your fellowship years, but beyond. Some of my closest friends and professional contacts to this day are people I went to the fellowship program with almost 10 years ago now. And there's a lot of value to that, right? And thirdly is very similar to the MBA. If you go to one of the better fellowship programs, so to speak, there's a certain pedigree that's associated with that, and that opens up a lot of doors for you. And so I'm a huge fan of the fellowship programs. If you want to be in industry, I think spending a year or two, depending on the fellowship program, is a worthwhile investment, and it pays dividends down the line.
Got you. And this is gonna be my last question. I'm gonna let you go for the night. I know everyone's kind of busy, but you a couple of times today you touched on networking, kind of per se. So what would be your advice for those who are kind of like nervous or don't really know how to network? Because all the time people say network. People don't even really know what the word means. What is your advice to those who are kind of new to the world, stepping into it, and just trying to just get their foot in the door and just trying to build on those relationships?
And Matthew, if you don't mind, that's a great question. If I can just expand on that, I think after the pandemic, I think networking has taken on just a totally new life. Obviously, we're all doing a lot of things virtually. So have you seen, are there any skills, are there any tactics that you've seen work well? And what advice would you share for students, fellows, industry professionals that are looking to really maintain those networks and maybe struggling to do so a little bit in a virtual environment? Do you have any advice for them?
Absolutely. So networking, and specifically networking kind of in the COVID pandemic environment. So number one, Matthew, I'd probably start off by demystifying networking. I think sometimes we make it a lot more complicated than it is. All of us have friends and we go hang out with our friends and talk about life. That's networking. That's just the personal version of networking, right? And so if we take away the mystery around it and just say, hey, I'm just trying to get to know other people who are interested in things that I'm interested in, it actually becomes a lot easier. So some of the things that have been very helpful to me, both starting back from my pharmacy school days to today, is you start off with people with whom you have a common connection. We went to the same school. We have a mutual friend, right? So, if I'm a TSU student and you reached out to me, Enoch, as a TSU alumni, I want to spend time with you because I know what it is that you're going through. If you tell me, hey, you not only went to TSQ, but you're also interested in business, then we have something common to talk about and kind of starting from that base, right? So that's number one. Number two, I'm actually kind of jealous of people today because technology has made it so much easier to be able to get to people whom you're interested in connecting with. 10, 15 years ago, you had to know somebody who knew somebody. Now with LinkedIn, you can pretty much get to whoever it is they're going to try to get to. So I think really leveraging, doing a lot of research and leveraging technology to be able to allow you to get to the people that you're trying to get to, I think is really important. Number three is when you get to those people, having a plan and being respectful of their time is really, really important because you're getting to people who are really busy and they have a lot of life and work going on, right? So, calls like this where you clearly have thought through what it is that you're interested in learning about and you have very direct questions that you're asking me of me actually helps a lot. And people are generally very happy and willing to share their experiences with other people because we want to be, a lot of people have done that for me in my career and I want to be able to continue to do that for others. That's number three. Number four, something I always do when I'm networking with people is if I reach out to Matthew because you've done something that I'm interested in doing or you have an experience that is interesting to me, I'll talk to you. And, at the end of the call, I always say, I've really enjoyed speaking with you, assuming I have enjoyed speaking with you, which I have. Do you know anybody else who you think I should be talking to that will be helpful for me to continue learning about what I'm trying to learn? And people are always like, oh yeah, my friend, my brother, my sister, people are always happy to kind of make those connections. And that's particularly important because while you should use technology and reach out cold emails or so, it's always easier when somebody introduces you to somebody else, right? So, Matthew reached out to me and said, hey, Enoch, I saw you connected to Titus on LinkedIn and he's a banker. I'm interested in learning about biotech banking. Do you mind making an introduction? If you're respectful about how you do it, people are always happy to do those connections, right? And so it starts with one person and then you go to two and then they introduce you to four people and eight people and then it kind of keeps growing and growing and growing. So that's number four. And then the last piece I'll say is make it two-way, right? No, I always say, hey, thank you so much. I appreciate, talking to you. I've learned so much from you. Is there anything I can do to be helpful to you? And maybe there isn't something right now, but, if there's anything I can ever do to be helpful later on, feel free to kind of reach out, so making it a two-way street, I think is really important. And kind of connected to that is stay in touch with the people you reach out to. If we speak today, it doesn't have to be every day, but 3 months, 6 months from now, it's like, hey, say, I was just checking in, I appreciated talking to you. I ended up in a fellowship program. I'm really enjoying it, or some kind of residency, kind of keep in touch with people and build those relationships. It's like any other relationship. You have to invest in it to be able to gain from it. Some of the things that have been really helpful to me in a network perspective. And again, doing it in the pandemic environment, while it adds a challenge in the fact that we cannot sit and have a coffee, in the world of Zoom and LinkedIn, it works just as fine. So don't be too shy to do it.
Exactly. Honestly, I've talked to so many people. I get blessed with the opportunity to talk to a lot of people in the positions that I'm trying to get to, and people like you as well. Mm-hmm. And it's always nice to hear the same things reinforced. And you said a lot of the same things as far as like building relationships and the small things. I think I was just talking to someone the other day. They're talking about the small things, and you even said it, like, is there anything else that I can do, or do you know anyone else that could actually be talking to? So I think that's going to be extremely helpful. I really do appreciate again you taking the time to come out here. I want to make sure, Melissa, do you have anything else that you want to add on to it?
I don't. This has been fantastic. I've learned a lot, so I really appreciate you taking the time.
Excellent.
We're so busy and it's late, so we really appreciate.
It's still early. I live in California, so not too late. But thank you for making time. The last thing I'll say is, it's such an exciting time to be in the life sciences industry. Because of our understanding of biology is getting so much better. There's all this supercomputing power, and now we're talking about artificial intelligence in identifying targets, and then the whole human genome decoding and what that means for technology. And you think about the gene therapy revolution, the cell therapy revolution. We are just at the beginning stages of what these technologies will mean for industry. Think about it. We went from the beginning of a pandemic to having a vaccine, multiple vaccines against totally new targets in a period of 1 year. It's incredible.
In less than a year, yeah.
That's incredible. So when I sit here and I think about where this industry is going, and I have a viewpoint sitting on boards of companies and the board of Biocom, and I look 10, 20, 30 years, I'm so excited for what is in store in this industry. And I implore upon all pharmacy students to think beyond. There's nothing wrong with being a pharmacist at a Walgreens or a hospital. We need that. But there's so much more opportunity out there. And your PharmD degree gives you such a strong advantage because you actually understand the science. And if you can take that and build on it, whether it's with a residency or a fellowship, whether it's in regulatory affairs or clinical strategy or business, whatever it is, there's so many opportunities out there. And some of this is, speaking a little selfishly as an executive in the biotech industry, I was on a board call earlier today, and we were talking about how while there's all this excitement in life sciences and the technology and the money coming to the space, the rate limiting step is going to be talent. We cannot find enough good people to do all the exciting work that we need to do. And that's a reason I'm imploring upon all pharmacy school students, just think beyond just being a pharmacist. There's so many opportunities out there. And I really implore upon you to explore them and see what else can be done with your career.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's an exciting time to be into the industry. You're right. So again, I do appreciate you taking the time and sharing all the knowledge. I learned so much. Melissa says she learned a lot, and I'm sure anyone watching this video will learn and pick up on something, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Thanks. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to come out, and y'all enjoy the rest of your night. Okay.
Thanks, Maddie. Thanks,
no problem. We'll
Thank
keep in touch.
Have a great evening.
You too.